Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn leather bag on her shoulder as she approached the security checkpoint at LaGuardia Airport. The early morning flight to Chicago would reunite her with her younger brother Miguel after 18 months of separation. Inside her bag, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, lay the only photo she had of their mother, a woman who had crossed the same borders decades ago with nothing but hope and determination. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch flights, families saying goodbye, and the constant hum of announcements echoing through the terminal. Sarah had arrived 2 hours early, knowing that her documentation might raise questions. Her work visa was legitimate, her employment at the non-profit organization genuine, but she had learned that being thorough was always better than being sorry. As she joined the security line, Sarah noticed the heightened tension in the air. Recent policy changes had made airport security more stringent, particularly for travelers who appeared to be from certain backgrounds. She had heard stories from friends and co-workers about increased scrutiny, longer wait times, and uncomfortable questioning that seemed to target people who looked like her. The woman ahead of her, an elderly lady clutching a small purse, was waved through quickly after a routine bag check. Sarah watched as businessman after businessman passed through with minimal inspection, their expensive briefcases receiving nothing more than a cursory glance. When her turn came, she placed her bag on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector without incident. But, instead of collecting her bag and moving on, Sarah found herself directed to a secondary inspection area. Officer Thompson, whose name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights, gestured for her to step aside. His expression was neutral but firm, the kind of professional mask that revealed nothing about his thoughts or intentions. "Ma'am, we need to conduct a more thorough inspection of your belongings," Officer Thompson announced, his voice carrying across the security area loud enough for other travelers to hear. Sarah felt the familiar flush of embarrassment creep up her neck as curious eyes turned in her direction. "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked quietly, hoping to keep the interaction as discreet as possible. "Standard procedure," Thompson replied curtly, though Sarah noticed that none of the previous passengers had been subjected to what he was calling standard procedure. Officer Thompson began removing items from her bag with methodical precision, but his handling seemed unnecessarily rough. Her laptop came out first, followed by her work documents, which she spread across the metal table without regard for their organization. Sarah watched nervously as papers that had taken her hours to organize for her presentation scattered across the surface. When Thompson reached the wrapped photograph, he tore through the tissue paper with little care. The delicate frame cracked as he examined the picture, and Sarah's heart sank. The photo showed her mother at age 25, holding baby Miguel in her arms while a young Sarah stood beside them. It was taken just months before their mother had died in a car accident, leaving Sarah to care for her younger brother. "Please be careful with that," Sarah said softly, reaching instinctively toward the damaged frame. "It's the only picture I have of my mother." Thompson's response was to continue his aggressive search, now dumping the contents of smaller compartments onto the table. Personal items that should have been handled with basic human dignity were treated as potential threats. Her medication bottles rattled as they hit the metal surface, and her journal fell open, exposing private thoughts to anyone who cared to look. Other travelers began to slow their pace as they passed by, some stopping entirely to watch the spectacle unfold. Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable, aware that she was being turned into some kind of example or warning to others. The whispers started small but grew louder as more people gathered to observe. "What do you think she did? Must be something serious for them to go through everything like that. I heard they've been cracking down on people lately." Sarah wanted to speak up, to explain that she had done nothing wrong, but experience had taught her that drawing more attention to herself would only make things worse. Instead, she stood quietly, watching as Thompson continued to rifle through her personal belongings with increasing aggression. The secondary inspection area was positioned prominently within the security checkpoint, ensuring maximum visibility for what was happening. Sarah realized this was intentional. The public nature of the search was designed to humiliate and intimidate, sending a clear message to anyone who might be watching. Thompson's colleagues seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of his search, exchanging glances that suggested this was going beyond normal procedures. One younger officer, Peterson, stepped closer and quietly asked Thompson if he needed assistance. The offer was declined with a sharp shake of the head. As the search continued, Thompson began questioning Sarah about the contents of her bag, her travel plans, and her reasons for flying to Chicago. Each question felt like an accusation, delivered with a tone that suggested she was already guilty of something, even though no one had explained what she was suspected of doing. "Business or pleasure?" Thompson asked, though he had already seen her work documents spread across the table. "Business," Sarah replied. "I work for a non-profit organization. I'm attending a conference about immigrant services." The irony of the situation was not lost on her. Here she was, being treated as a potential threat while traveling to discuss how to better serve communities that faced exactly this kind of discrimination and profiling. Thompson's search became increasingly invasive as he examined personal items that had no possible security relevance. He opened her makeup compact, unrolled her phone charger completely, and even unzipped the lining of her bag to check for hidden compartments. Each action seemed designed more to assert dominance than to ensure safety. Other security officers began to take notice of the extended search. Sarah could see them exchanging concerned looks, but none intervened. The hierarchy and culture of the workplace seemed to discourage challenging a colleague's methods, even when those methods appeared excessive. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel. "Can't wait to see you, sis. Thanks for coming to my graduation. Mom would be so proud." The message, visible on her phone screen, seemed to mock the situation she found herself in. Here she was, trying to attend her brother's college graduation, a milestone their mother had dreamed of but never lived to see, and, instead, she was being treated like a criminal. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and Sarah could hear their speculative comments growing bolder. Some expressed sympathy, recognizing the search as excessive, while others seemed to assume that such treatment must be justified. The division in public opinion played out in real time as people watched her personal life being dissected in public. Thompson's supervisor, a woman named Officer Rodriguez, appeared at the edge of the inspection area. She observed the scene with a furrowed brow, clearly assessing whether the search had crossed appropriate boundaries. Her presence seemed to make Thompson more defensive rather than more careful. "Finding anything?" Rodriguez asked casually, though her tone carried an undertone of concern. "Just being thorough," Thompson replied, his voice slightly strained. "You never know what people might be hiding." The comment stung because of its obvious implications. Sarah was not people in some abstract sense. She was a specific person being treated as automatically suspicious based on assumptions that had nothing to do with her actual behavior or circumstances. As Thompson continued his search, he began to make comments that revealed his underlying attitudes. References to these people and suggestions about what they typically try to smuggle through security made his motivations increasingly clear. The search was not about security, it was about making a statement. Sarah's colleagues from work would be expecting her at the conference registration table in Chicago by afternoon. She had prepared extensively for her presentation about trauma-informed care for immigrant families, drawing on both her professional training and personal experience. The delay was threatening not just her travel plans but also her professional responsibilities. The damaged photograph of her mother seemed to watch from the inspection table, a silent witness to the indignity being played out. Sarah thought about her mother's own experiences with authority figures, the careful way she had taught her children to respond to uniforms and official questions. "Always be respectful," her mother had said. But never forget that respect should go both ways. Thompson's search had now been going on for more than 20 minutes, far longer than any reasonable security check should require. Sarah's bag had been completely emptied, every item examined and re-examined, yet no violations or concerns had been found. The continuation of the search despite the absence of any suspicious findings made its true purpose obvious to everyone watching. Other travelers began to express their discomfort with the situation. An older man in a business suit approached Officer Rodriguez and quietly suggested that the search seemed excessive. A young mother with children asked if there was another security line her family could use, clearly wanting to avoid exposing her children to the scene. The attention from other travelers seemed to make Thompson more aggressive rather than more cautious. He began handling Sarah's belongings with even less care, and his questions became more pointed and personal. When he found her work ID badge, he studied it with exaggerated suspicion, as if a legitimate non-profit organization employee badge might somehow be fraudulent. "So you work with immigrants," Thompson said, his tone making the word sound like an accusation. "I work with families," Sarah corrected gently. "People who need help navigating legal processes and accessing services." Her response seemed to irritate him further. The idea that someone might professionally advocate for people in situations similar to what she was experiencing appeared to increase rather than decrease his suspicion. Officer Peterson, the younger colleague who had offered assistance earlier, stepped closer to the inspection table. His body language suggested growing discomfort with how the situation was developing. He exchanged a meaningful look with Officer Rodriguez, who had been observing with increasing concern. Sarah noticed a shift in the atmosphere around the security checkpoint. What had begun as curious observation from other travelers was evolving into something more supportive. Several people were now openly criticizing the length and intensity of the search, and some had begun taking photos and videos with their phones. The documentation of the incident seemed to make the security officers more self-conscious about their actions. Thompson glanced nervously at the phones pointed in his direction, clearly aware that his behavior was being recorded and could potentially be shared widely. Officer Rodriguez stepped closer to the inspection table, her supervisor status becoming more apparent. She examined the scattered contents of Sarah's bag and the obviously excessive nature of the search that had produced no concerning findings. "Thompson," she said quietly, "wrap this up." But Thompson seemed reluctant to end the search without some kind of justification for its length and intensity. He continued examining items he had already checked multiple times, as if hoping to discover something he had missed that would validate his actions. Sarah remained patient and composed, knowing that any display of frustration or anger would only be used to justify further harassment. She had learned this lesson from watching others in similar situations, understanding that the system was designed to provoke reactions that could then be used against the person being searched. The broken frame holding her mother's photograph seemed symbolic of something larger being damaged: trust, dignity, and the basic assumption that all travelers would be treated with equal respect and consideration. Sarah carefully picked up the pieces, trying to protect what remained of the image that meant so much to her. As the search finally seemed to be winding down, Thompson made one last attempt to find something problematic. He examined Sarah's identification documents with microscopic attention, looking for any discrepancy or issue that might justify the treatment she had received. Finding nothing, he began the process of returning her belongings to her bag, though his handling remained careless and disrespectful. Items were shoved back into compartments without regard for organization or the potential for damage. The crowd of onlookers had grown large enough to create a backup in the security area, and other officers were now directing people around the inspection table to keep traffic flowing. The disruption caused by the excessive search was affecting the entire checkpoint's operations. Officer Rodriguez approached Sarah directly for the first time, her expression apologetic though she said nothing that could be interpreted as criticism of her colleague's actions. The institutional loyalty that prevented direct intervention also prevented any acknowledgement that the search had been inappropriate. As Sarah began to repack her bag, she noticed that several items were missing or had been moved to different locations within her luggage. The search had been so chaotic and aggressive that even Thompson seemed unsure where everything belonged. The repacking process felt almost as invasive as the search itself. Sarah tried to organize her belongings while Thompson stood over her, his presence suggesting that even this simple task was somehow suspect. Her hands trembled slightly as she carefully placed the broken picture frame back in her bag, wrapping it in a clean tissue from her purse since the original had been destroyed. Officer Rodriguez had moved away to handle other duties, but her periodic glances back toward the inspection table suggested she remained concerned about the situation. The other travelers who had stopped to watch were slowly moving on, though many continued to look back with expressions of sympathy and discomfort. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another message from Miguel: "Hope your flight isn't delayed. The whole family is excited to meet you at the graduation ceremony tomorrow." The reminder of why she was traveling made the current situation even more frustrating. This should have been a celebration, a moment of joy and achievement, but instead it was being overshadowed by humiliation and delay. As she struggled to fit everything back into her bag properly, Sarah became aware of a new presence nearby. A tall man in a crisp uniform had approached the security area, his bearing and demeanor different from the other officers. His name tag read Captain Morrison, and the additional insignia on his uniform indicated a higher rank than anyone else in the immediate vicinity. Captain Morrison observed the scene with sharp, analytical eyes. He took in the scattered remains of the search, Thompson's defensive posture, the crowd of concerned onlookers, and Sarah's obvious distress. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in his bearing that suggested disapproval of what he was witnessing. "What's the situation here?" Captain Morrison asked Thompson, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being answered quickly and completely. Thompson straightened up immediately, his earlier aggression replaced by nervous deference. "Routine secondary inspection, sir. Just making sure everything is secure." Morrison's gaze swept over the inspection table, taking in the obvious excessiveness of what had occurred. Sarah's belongings were scattered across a much wider area than any normal search would require, and the damaged condition of several items spoke to handling that went beyond professional necessity. "How long has this inspection been ongoing?" Morrison asked, consulting his watch. "About 25 minutes, sir," Thompson replied, though his voice carried uncertainty, as if he hadn't been paying attention to the time. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at this information. A secondary inspection that lasted nearly half an hour without discovering any prohibited items was clearly outside normal parameters. His experience told him that legitimate security concerns were typically resolved much more quickly. Sarah continued repacking her bag while listening to the exchange, hoping that the arrival of a senior officer might bring some resolution to the situation. She had missed her original boarding time and would need to speak with the airline about getting on a later flight to Chicago. "And what has this inspection revealed?" Morrison asked Thompson, his tone becoming more pointed. Thompson's response was evasive, mentioning general security protocols and the importance of thoroughness without identifying any specific concerns or findings. It became increasingly clear that the search had been extended without justification, continuing long after it should have been concluded. Morrison stepped closer to examine Sarah's belongings himself, his trained eye quickly assessing what type of items had been searched and how they had been handled. The broken picture frame caught his attention immediately, and he picked it up carefully, examining the damaged image inside. "This was damaged during the search?" he asked Sarah directly, speaking to her for the first time. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly. "It's the only picture I have of my mother." Morrison's expression softened slightly as he looked at the photograph, which clearly showed a family portrait rather than anything that could possibly pose a security threat. The sentimental value of the item was obvious, and its destruction during a search suggested carelessness that went beyond acceptable professional standards. "I apologize for the damage to your photograph," Morrison said to Sarah, his voice carrying genuine regret. "This should not have happened." The apology was the first acknowledgement from any security officer that something inappropriate had occurred. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication, though she knew the damage had already been done both to her belongings and to her faith in the fairness of the system. Thompson shifted uncomfortably as his supervisor continued to examine the scene. The presence of a higher-ranking officer who was clearly questioning the appropriateness of the search put him in an increasingly difficult position. Morrison turned his attention back to Thompson, his demeanor becoming more serious. "Officer Thompson, I need you to explain to me why this search continued for 25 minutes without producing any security concerns." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thompson's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the nervous energy of someone who realized he might have overstepped important boundaries. His response was a stammering attempt to justify actions that were looking increasingly unjustifiable. "Sir, I was just being thorough. With everything that's been happening lately, I thought it was important to make sure we didn't miss anything." Morrison's response was swift and direct. Being thorough does not mean being excessive. And it certainly does not mean damaging a passenger's personal belongings without cause. The reprimand was delivered in front of the other security officers, ensuring that everyone in the area understood that Thompson's actions were being officially criticized. Sarah could see the relief on Officer Peterson's face, suggesting that he had been uncomfortable with the situation but felt unable to intervene. Morrison's attention turned to the crowd of onlookers who were still watching the scene unfold. He realized that the public nature of the incident had created a problem beyond just the immediate treatment of one passenger. The airport's reputation and the public's confidence in security procedures were at stake. Officer Rodriguez, Morrison called to Thompson's supervisor, "I need you to conduct a review of this incident and provide me with a full report by the end of the day." Rodriguez nodded quickly, clearly understanding that she would need to document everything that had occurred and potentially take corrective action with Thompson. The formal nature of Morrison's request indicated that this was being treated as a serious matter rather than a minor misunderstanding. Sarah finished repacking her bag as best she could, though the disorganization caused by the search meant that many items were not in their proper places. Her carefully organized work documents were now mixed together randomly, and several personal items had been damaged beyond repair. Morrison approached Sarah again, his expression conveying both professional concern and personal regret. "Ma'am, I want you to know that what happened here is not representative of our standard procedures or values. You were treated unfairly, and I sincerely apologize." The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than Morrison might have realized. After 30 minutes of being treated as a suspect and potential threat, being recognized as someone who deserved basic respect and courtesy felt like a restoration of her humanity. "I understand that you've missed your original flight," Morrison continued. "I'm going to personally ensure that the airline accommodates you on the next available flight to Chicago without any additional charges." The practical assistance was welcome, but Sarah knew that the real damage went beyond missed flights and rebooking fees. The experience had reminded her of her vulnerability in a system that could subject her to arbitrary treatment based on assumptions and prejudices rather than actual behavior. Thompson had retreated to a position where he could overhear the conversation but was no longer directly involved. His body language suggested shame and defensiveness in equal measure, the posture of someone who knew he had acted inappropriately but was not yet ready to fully acknowledge it. Officer Peterson approached Sarah hesitantly, his young face showing obvious discomfort with what he had witnessed. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about what happened. This isn't how we're supposed to treat people." His willingness to speak up, even after the fact, suggested that not all of the security personnel shared Thompson's attitudes or approved of his methods. Sarah appreciated the gesture, though she wondered why he had not intervened during the search itself. Morrison was now speaking quietly with Rodriguez, their conversation clearly focused on the administrative and disciplinary aspects of the incident. Sarah could see that Thompson was watching their discussion nervously, obviously concerned about the potential consequences of his actions. The crowd around the security checkpoint had largely dispersed, but several travelers approached Sarah to express their sympathy and support. An elderly woman touched her arm gently and said, "That was wrong, honey. I'm sorry you had to go through that." A young man handed her his business card and mentioned that he was a civil rights lawyer if she needed assistance. The spontaneous support from strangers provided some comfort, reminding Sarah that not everyone approved of the treatment she had received. The public nature of the incident, which had initially been a source of humiliation, had also created witnesses who could testify to the inappropriate nature of the search. Morrison returned to Sarah with information about her rebooking. "I've spoken with the airline supervisor, and they're holding a seat for you on the 2:15 flight to Chicago. You won't need to go through security again, and they've upgraded you to first class as an apology for the inconvenience." The practical resolution was appreciated, though Sarah knew that no upgrade could compensate for the emotional impact of the experience. Still, Morrison's personal involvement in ensuring fair treatment was more than she had expected from someone in authority. "Is there anything else I can do to help address this situation?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting genuine interest in making things right rather than just minimizing problems. Sarah considered mentioning the discrimination and profiling aspects of what had occurred, but decided that Morrison's willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing and take corrective action was probably as much as she could realistically expect in the immediate situation. "I just want to get to my brother's graduation," she said simply. "He's worked so hard for this moment, and our mother always dreamed of seeing him graduate from college." Morrison's expression showed that he understood the deeper significance of her travel. This was not just a business trip or vacation being disrupted, but a family milestone that carried emotional weight and meaning that could not be rescheduled or replaced. Then, let's make sure you get there, Morrison said firmly. Officer Peterson, please escort Ms. Martinez to her gate and ensure that she has everything she needs for her flight. The offer of an escort was both helpful and symbolic, representing a complete reversal from being treated as a potential threat to being given personal assistance and protection. Peterson nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of professional courtesy that should have been shown from the beginning. As they prepared to leave the security area, Sarah took one last look at the inspection table where her belongings had been scattered and her dignity had been challenged. The experience would stay with her, but Morrison's intervention had prevented it from becoming even worse. Thompson remained at his post, but his demeanor had changed completely. The aggressive confidence he had displayed during the search had been replaced by obvious anxiety about the consequences of his actions. Other security officers were giving him a wide berth, suggesting that his colleagues were also uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Rodriguez approached Sarah before she left the area, her expression serious and apologetic. "Ma'am, I want you to know that we take this incident very seriously. Officer Thompson's actions do not reflect our training or our values, and appropriate measures will be taken." The promise of accountability was important, though Sarah knew that change in institutional culture required more than disciplining individual officers. The attitudes and assumptions that had driven Thompson's behavior were likely shared by others and would require systemic rather than individual solutions. As Peterson led her toward the departure gates, Sarah reflected on the complexity of what had just occurred. The same system that had subjected her to unjust treatment had also contained people who recognized that injustice and took steps to address it. The challenge was ensuring that the Morrisons of the world had more influence than the Thompsons. Her phone buzzed with another message from Miguel, this one including a photo of his graduation cap decorated with a small flag representing their mother's country of origin. The image reminded Sarah of why this trip was so important and why she could not let one negative experience overshadow the celebration ahead. Peterson walked respectfully beside her, not trying to make conversation but available if she needed assistance. His presence served as a protective escort and a visible sign that she was now under the official protection of someone who recognized her right to respectful treatment. The walk to the departure gate felt surreal after the intensity of the security checkpoint experience. Officer Peterson maintained a respectful distance while ensuring Sarah felt supported, occasionally asking if she needed anything or if she was feeling all right. The contrast between his considerate treatment and Thompson's aggressive approach highlighted how differently the same situation could have been handled from the beginning. As they passed other travelers going about their normal airport routines, Sarah became acutely aware of how her own experience had been so different from theirs. Families chatted excitedly about vacations, business travelers typed on laptops while waiting for flights, and couples said goodbye with casual kisses. The normalcy around her made the abnormality of her treatment even more stark. When they reached her gate, Peterson waited while Sarah checked in with the airline desk. The gate agent, who had been briefed about the situation, was particularly attentive and apologetic. She confirmed Sarah's seat in first class and mentioned that the flight crew had been notified to provide any assistance needed. "Ma'am," Peterson said before departing, "I want you to know that not everyone in security shares Officer Thompson's attitude. Most of us became officers because we want to help keep people safe, not to make them feel unwelcome or threatened." His words carried genuine regret, not just for what had happened but for how it might affect Sarah's perception of all security personnel. Sarah could see that he was young and idealistic, probably hoping that his career in airport security would allow him to serve the public professionally and fairly. "I appreciate you saying that," Sarah replied. "It helps to know that there are people like you and Captain Morrison who care about doing the right thing." After Peterson left, Sarah found a quiet corner near the departure gate where she could collect her thoughts and check her damaged belongings. The broken picture frame could not be repaired, but she carefully transferred the photograph to her wallet where it would be safer. Seeing her mother's face reminded her of the strength and resilience she had inherited. Her phone rang with a call from her supervisor at the nonprofit organization. Word had somehow already reached Chicago about the incident, probably through social media posts from witnesses at the airport. Her supervisor expressed concern for her well-being and assured her that the organization would support her if she decided to file a formal complaint. "These kinds of experiences are exactly why our work is so important," her supervisor said. People need advocates who understand what it feels like to be treated as less than fully human by institutions that are supposed to serve everyone equally. The conversation reminded Sarah that her personal experience connected to larger patterns of discrimination that affected many people in similar situations. Her work with immigrant families had given her professional knowledge about these issues, but experiencing them firsthand added a dimension of understanding that no training could provide. While waiting for her flight, Sarah noticed other travelers looking at her with recognition from the security checkpoint incident. Some averted their eyes awkwardly, while others offered supportive smiles or nods. A young mother with children approached and quietly pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand before moving away. The note read, "I saw what happened back there. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. I hope the rest of your trip goes better. You handled yourself with incredible grace." It was signed simply "A fellow mom who believes in treating everyone with dignity." The unexpected kindness from a stranger helped counterbalance some of the negativity from the security experience. Sarah realized that the public nature of the incident, while initially humiliating, had also created opportunities for people to witness injustice and respond with compassion. As boarding time approached, Sarah reflected on how the morning's events might affect the presentation she was scheduled to give at the conference. Her talk was about trauma-informed care for immigrant families, focusing on how institutional encounters could either heal or harm vulnerable populations. The irony was that she now had fresh, personal experience with exactly the kind of traumatic institutional encounter she had planned to discuss academically. The first-class upgrade meant boarding early, and Sarah was grateful for the opportunity to settle into her seat before the aircraft filled with other passengers. The flight attendant who greeted her had clearly been briefed about the situation and offered extra attention without making Sarah feel like a charity case. Once airborne, Sarah opened her laptop to review her conference presentation, but found herself adding new slides based on the morning's experience. The theoretical framework she had planned to present now felt incomplete without acknowledgement of how these issues played out in real-world encounters with authority. She wrote, "Institutional trauma occurs not just through dramatic events, but through everyday encounters where individuals are treated as inherently suspicious or less deserving of respect. The cumulative effect of these experiences shapes how entire communities relate to systems that should serve them." The passenger in the seat next to her, an older businessman, noticed her typing and asked if she was preparing for a presentation. When Sarah explained her work, he revealed that he was a human resources executive who had been struggling with diversity and inclusion issues at his company. "I've been trying to understand why our employees' surveys show such different experiences based on people's backgrounds," he said. "Maybe what you experienced today helps explain some of that. People bring their encounters with various institutions into the workplace, and those experiences affect how they interact with authority figures." The conversation that developed during the flight helped Sarah process her own experience while also providing insights that would enrich her presentation. The businessman shared stories of employees who seemed defensive or withdrawn during interactions with supervisors, behaviors that made more sense when understood in the context of broader patterns of discriminatory treatment. "I never realized how my position of authority might be triggering for people who have had negative encounters with other authority figures," he admitted. "It makes me want to completely rethink how we train managers to interact with diverse teams." By the time the plane landed in Chicago, Sarah had transformed her presentation from an academic discussion into something more personal and immediate. The morning's trauma had become raw material for advocacy and education, though she knew the emotional processing would take much longer. Miguel was waiting at the baggage claim with a huge grin and a bouquet of flowers. His excitement about graduation and seeing his sister again was infectious, momentarily pushing aside the negative aspects of the day. When he hugged her, Sarah felt some of the tension and stress beginning to release. "You look tired," Miguel observed as they walked to his car. "Was the flight rough?" Sarah considered how much to tell him about the airport incident. She did not want to dampen his graduation celebration with stories of discrimination and mistreatment, but she also knew that honest communication had always been important in their relationship. "I had some trouble at airport security," she said carefully. "Nothing dangerous, just an officer who took his job too seriously. But it's handled now, and I'm here for your big day." Miguel's expression immediately became concerned and protective. Despite being younger, he had always felt responsible for looking out for his sister, especially since their mother's death had left them to rely on each other for family support. What kind of trouble? Did they give you problems because of your name or how you look? His questions revealed that he was not naive about the realities of discrimination, despite his youth. Sarah decided to give him a brief version of the story, emphasizing Captain Morrison's intervention and the positive resolution rather than dwelling on Thompson's behavior. She wanted Miguel to understand that while injustice existed, there were also people in positions of authority who were committed to fairness. The important thing is that I'm here now, she concluded. Tomorrow is about celebrating your achievement and honoring Mom's memory. One bad airport officer isn't going to ruin that. Miguel's university apartment was decorated with graduation decorations and photos chronicling his 4 years of academic achievement. Sarah was struck by how much he had grown and matured since she had last seen him in person. The young man who greeted her was confident and articulate, clearly ready to begin the next phase of his life. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, Miguel said as they looked through photo albums together. I wish she could see how far we've both come. You with your work helping other families, and me getting ready to start my master's program in social work. The mention of their mother brought back thoughts of the broken picture frame in Sarah's bag. She decided to tell Miguel about the damage and show him the photograph that had been so carelessly handled during the security search. When Miguel saw the cracked frame and heard about how it had been damaged, his anger was immediate and intense. They had no right to treat you that way, he said fiercely. That picture is irreplaceable, and they destroyed it for no reason. Sarah shared Miguel's anger, but she had learned to channel such emotions into constructive action rather than letting them consume her energy. The picture is damaged, but not destroyed, she said gently. And neither are we. We're going to get it properly repaired, and you're going to graduate tomorrow, and Mom's memory is going to be honored regardless of what one ignorant officer did to a piece of glass. Miguel's girlfriend, Elena, joined them for dinner and proved to be thoughtful and politically aware. When she heard about the airport incident, she immediately connected it to broader patterns of injustice that she had studied in her sociology courses. It's gaslighting on an institutional level, Elena observed. They make you question whether you're being too sensitive or reading too much into things, when really you're experiencing something that's designed to make you feel unwelcome and subordinate. The three young adults spent the evening discussing social justice issues, institutional reform, and their shared commitment to using their education and careers to create positive change. Sarah was impressed by the sophistication of their analysis and their determination to address systemic problems rather than just complaining about them. Your generation gives me hope, Sarah told them. You understand these issues in ways that took me years to learn, and you're not willing to accept injustice as normal or inevitable. Elena mentioned that her senior thesis had focused on microaggressions in institutional settings, and she asked if Sarah would be willing to share her experience as a case study in future research. The idea of contributing to academic understanding of these issues appealed to Sarah, who saw scholarship as another tool for advocacy. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself feeling grateful for the support system surrounding Miguel. Elena was clearly a positive influence who challenged him intellectually while also providing emotional support. His friends from school, who stopped by throughout the evening, were diverse and engaged young people who seemed committed to using their education for social good. Mom would have loved Elena, Miguel said privately to Sarah as they cleaned up after dinner. She would have been so proud to see the life I'm building and the person I'm becoming. Sarah agreed wholeheartedly. Their mother had always emphasized education as a path to both personal advancement and social contribution. Miguel was clearly following that guidance, with plans to work in community mental health after completing his graduate degree. Before going to bed, Sarah called Captain Morrison's office to leave a message thanking him for his intervention and professionalism. She wanted him to know that his actions had made a significant difference in how the incident concluded, and that his leadership provided hope for more fair treatment in the future. She also called her supervisor to confirm that she would be able to give her presentation the following afternoon, after Miguel's graduation ceremony. The combination of personal experience and professional expertise would make her talk more powerful and authentic than originally planned. As Sarah prepared for sleep in Miguel's small guest room, she reflected on the day's emotional journey from humiliation through vindication to celebration. The morning's trauma had been real and painful, but it had not defined the entire day or overshadowed the joy of reuniting with her brother. Looking at the damaged photograph one more time before placing it safely in her wallet, Sarah made a mental note to have it professionally restored when she returned home. The image of her mother holding baby Miguel while young Sarah stood beside them deserved to be preserved properly, both as a family treasure and as a reminder of the resilience that had brought them all to this point. The morning of Miguel's graduation dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed for celebration. Sarah woke early and spent time preparing her remarks for the family gathering that would follow the ceremony. She wanted to honor their mother's memory while also acknowledging Miguel's personal achievement and the family's journey to this moment. Over breakfast, Miguel expressed nervousness about the ceremony and the transition from student life to professional responsibilities. Sarah recognized his anxiety as normal for someone facing a major life change, but she also saw the confidence and maturity that would serve him well in graduate school and beyond. "Mom used to say that education was something nobody could ever take away from you," Sarah reminded him. "Today, you're receiving something permanent and valuable that will benefit you for the rest of your life." Elena arrived early to help with preparations, and Sarah was again struck by the young woman's thoughtfulness and intelligence. She had prepared a photo presentation about Miguel's college years that would be shown at the family gathering, including images that connected his achievements to their family history and their mother's dreams. As they drove to the university for the graduation ceremony, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in Miguel's accomplishment competed with sadness that their mother could not witness this milestone, while excitement about his future mixed with concern about the challenges he might face as a young professional from their background. The graduation venue was impressive, with hundreds of families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. Sarah observed the diversity of the crowd and was reminded that higher education remained one of the most effective paths for social mobility, despite the obstacles that many students faced. Miguel looked distinguished in his cap and gown, and Sarah was struck by how much he resembled their mother at the same age. The family photos they took before the ceremony would become treasured keepsakes, documenting a moment that represented hope fulfilled and potential realized. During the ceremony itself, Sarah found herself thinking about the previous day's airport experience in a new context. The discrimination and disrespect she had encountered represented the kind of barriers that many families faced in pursuing education and professional advancement. Miguel's graduation was not just a personal victory, but a form of resistance against systems that attempted to limit opportunities for people like them. When Miguel's name was called and he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Sarah felt overwhelmed with emotion. She cheered loudly, joined by Elena and the friends who had become Miguel's chosen family during his college years. The moment represented not just individual achievement, but family resilience and generational progress. After the ceremony, the family gathering at Miguel's apartment was filled with laughter, good food, and storytelling. Sarah shared memories of their mother's dreams for her children's education, while Miguel's friends and Elena contributed their own perspectives on his character and potential. Captain Morrison called Sarah's cell phone during the gathering to provide an update on the previous day's incident. Officer Thompson had been suspended pending a full investigation, and new training protocols were being implemented to prevent similar incidents. Morrison wanted Sarah to know that her experience was being taken seriously and was leading to meaningful changes. "Your dignity and the dignity of all travelers is important to us," Morrison said. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and we're committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again." Sarah appreciated the call and the follow-up action, though she knew that changing institutional culture required more than disciplining individual officers. Still, Morrison's personal involvement suggested that some people in leadership positions were genuinely committed to fair treatment for all travelers. When Sarah mentioned the call to the gathered friends and family, it sparked a broader conversation about institutional accountability and the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice. Miguel's friends shared their own experiences with discrimination and profiling, creating a supportive environment for discussing these difficult topics. Elena mentioned that several of her professors had expressed interest in Sarah's presentation the following day, and had asked if it could be recorded for use in future classes. The idea of turning her traumatic experience into educational content appealed to Sarah, who saw teaching as another form of advocacy. Sometimes our worst experiences become our most powerful tools for helping others, Sarah reflected. What happened at the airport yesterday was terrible, but if sharing it helps prevent similar treatment for other people, then something positive comes from the pain. Miguel raised a toast to his sister's strength and resilience, acknowledging how her support had made his educational achievements possible. The recognition meant more to Sarah than any professional accolade, representing the deep bonds that had sustained their family through difficult times. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself feeling genuinely grateful for the complete experience of the trip, including the challenging parts. The airport incident had provided new insights that would strengthen her professional work, while Miguel's graduation had reinforced her faith in the possibility of positive change through education and perseverance. Elena pulled Sarah aside to mention that she had been documenting the graduation celebration for a digital storytelling project about immigrant families and educational achievement. She asked if Sarah would be comfortable sharing her story as part of a broader narrative about resilience and success in the face of discrimination. Stories like yours need to be told, Elena explained. They help people understand that behind every statistic about educational achievement or professional success, there are real families who have overcome real obstacles to reach their goals. Sarah agreed to participate, recognizing that storytelling was another form of advocacy that could reach audiences who might not otherwise encounter these perspectives. Her experience could help humanize policy debates and challenge stereotypes about immigrant families and their contributions to society. The following morning, Sarah's presentation at the conference was attended by a larger audience than originally expected. Word about her recent experience had spread through social media and professional networks, drawing additional participants who were interested in her first-hand perspective on institutional discrimination. Her talk wove together theoretical frameworks about trauma-informed care with personal narrative about the airport incident, creating a powerful combination of intellectual analysis and emotional impact. The audience was visibly moved by her description of how quickly respect could turn to suspicion, and how individual officers could either perpetuate or interrupt patterns of discriminatory treatment. When we talk about institutional trauma, Sarah explained, we're not just talking about dramatic events like deportation or detention. We're also talking about everyday encounters where people are made to feel unwelcome, suspicious, or less deserving of basic courtesy. These experiences accumulate over time, affecting how entire communities relate to systems that should serve them. During the question and answer session, several attendees shared their own experiences with profiling and discrimination, creating an impromptu support group atmosphere that extended beyond the formal presentation. A federal supervisor mentioned that he would be sharing Sarah's insights with his staff as part of ongoing cultural competency training. One audience member, who identified herself as a congressional staffer working on immigration policy, asked for permission to share Sarah's story with legislators who were considering reforms to airport security procedures. Sarah agreed, emphasizing that policy changes needed to address not just individual bad actors but the systemic factors that allowed discrimination to flourish. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by several people who wanted to continue the conversation about institutional reform and community advocacy. A law professor mentioned that her law school was developing a new clinic focused on civil rights violations in transportation settings, and asked if Sarah would consider serving as a community advisor. The interest in her story and expertise was gratifying, but Sarah was also aware of the emotional toll of repeatedly recounting traumatic experiences. She made a mental note to seek support from colleagues who specialized in secondary trauma prevention, recognizing that advocacy work required sustainable practices. On the flight back to New York, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 3 days. The trip had begun with excitement about Miguel's graduation, taken a difficult turn through the airport security incident, and concluded with new professional opportunities and personal insights. The broken picture frame in her bag had been carefully wrapped for transport to a professional restoration service. The photograph itself was undamaged, and Sarah had learned that the frame could be repaired using techniques that would preserve its original character while strengthening the damaged areas. As the plane descended toward LaGuardia Airport, Sarah felt a mix of apprehension and determination about returning through the same security checkpoint where she had been mistreated. She was curious to see if any changes had been implemented, and whether her experience had contributed to improved training or procedures. The security checkpoint appeared normal as Sarah approached, with no obvious signs of the previous incident or any resulting changes. She was processed quickly and professionally by officers who showed no recognition of her or knowledge of what had occurred. The efficiency was welcome, but Sarah wondered if the lack of acknowledgement meant that lessons had not been learned. Officer Peterson was working at a different checkpoint, but he noticed Sarah and approached during a break in passenger flow. He appeared nervous but determined to speak with her. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that Officer Thompson is no longer working here," Peterson said quietly. "And we've all received additional training about respectful passenger treatment. What happened to you made a difference." The information was reassuring, though Sarah knew that individual accountability was just one part of necessary systemic change. Still, Peterson's willingness to seek her out and provide an update suggested that some officers had genuinely learned from the incident. Captain Morrison also appeared, having apparently been notified of Sarah's return through the checkpoint. He asked about her trip and expressed satisfaction that she had been able to attend her brother's graduation without further incident. "I hope your experience yesterday was better than your experience here," Morrison said. "And I want you to know that the changes we're implementing are permanent, not just temporary responses to negative publicity." Sarah appreciated Morrison's continued engagement and his apparent commitment to meaningful reform. She mentioned that she had shared her experience at the conference and that there was interest in her story from policymakers and advocates. "Good," Morrison replied. "Change happens when people are willing to speak truth about their experiences, even when it's uncomfortable. Your willingness to do that is making a difference." The taxi ride home gave Sarah time to process the complete experience and consider how it would affect her future work. The personal trauma had been real and significant, but it had also provided insights that would strengthen her advocacy and her ability to support other families facing similar challenges. Her apartment felt welcoming after the intensity of the trip, and Sarah was grateful for the familiar surroundings and the opportunity to decompress privately. She carefully placed the wrapped photograph on her desk, where it would wait for professional restoration, and began organizing her notes from the conference. A text message from Miguel included photos from his graduation day and a simple note: "Thanks for being there, sis. Mom would be proud of both of us." The message reminded Sarah that the trip's primary purpose had been accomplished successfully, despite the challenges along the way. Elena had sent a follow-up email with draft interview questions for the digital storytelling project, along with information about how the final product would be used to support advocacy efforts for fair treatment of immigrant families. Sarah was impressed by the young woman's professionalism and commitment to social justice. As Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on the complex lessons of the past few days. Institutional discrimination was real and harmful, but so was institutional accountability when practiced by committed leaders. Individual officers could cause significant damage through bias and aggression, but they could also provide protection and support when properly trained and supervised. The broken picture frame would be repaired, Miguel's graduation had been celebrated appropriately, and new professional opportunities had emerged from personal trauma. Most importantly, Sarah's story was now part of a broader conversation about justice and reform that had the potential to prevent similar experiences for other travelers. Looking ahead, Sarah knew that her work with immigrant families would be informed by her new understanding of how institutional encounters could either heal or harm vulnerable populations. The airport incident had provided painful but valuable insights that would strengthen her advocacy for years to come. The trip had ended where it began, but Sarah herself had changed in ways that would influence her personal and professional life going forward. Sometimes, she realized, the most transformative experiences were the ones that challenged fundamental assumptions about fairness, justice, and the possibility of positive change in imperfect systems.